Picture this. A man walks out of a factory in 1952. He's 24 years old, high school diploma, nothing more. He clocks out, drives home in a car he owns outright, parks in the driveway of a house he's buying on a 30-year mortgage, walks through the door where his wife is cooking dinner, kisses his 2 kids on the head, and sits down to read the evening paper. One income, one job, one life that feels, by today's standards, like an absolute fairy tale. Now picture yourself. College degree, maybe even a master's. You and your partner both work full-time. You're still renting. The car payment eats a chunk of your paycheck every month. Kids? That's a financial calculation that feels more like a gamble than a dream. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a question gnaws at you like a rat in the walls. What the hell happened? You've been sold a story. The story says that we live in the most advanced, most prosperous economy in human history. The story says your grandparents had it harder. The story says that if you're struggling, it's because you're not working hard enough, not smart enough, not disciplined enough. But here's the thing about stories. Sometimes they're just lies, dressed up in nostalgia and propaganda. The 1950s weren't some magical time when capitalism worked perfectly and everyone got their fair share. But something was different. Something broke between then and now. And if you follow the money, if you dig through the decades of policy changes and economic shifts and corporate boardroom decisions, you find a truth that nobody in power wants you to see. The game was rigged. Not against your grandparents, against you. This is the single income myth. The idea that one person could support an entire family on a factory wage wasn't just possible, it was normal. It was the backbone of an entire generation's identity. And it didn't disappear because of some natural evolution of the economy. It was dismantled, piece by piece, policy by policy, decade by decade, until we arrived here, in a world where 2 incomes barely cover what one used to, and we're told to be grateful for the opportunity. So let's go back. Let's pull apart the myth and the math. Let's see what they took from us, how they did it, and why they want you to believe it was inevitable. The first thing you need to understand is that the 1950s economy was not an accident. It was engineered. And it was engineered in response to a crisis so catastrophic that it nearly destroyed capitalism itself. We're talking about the Great Depression, 1929. The stock market doesn't just decline, it collapses. Fortunes evaporate overnight. Banks fail by the thousands. Unemployment hits 25%. People are standing in bread lines, sleeping in shanty towns, watching their children go hungry. And the entire capitalist system, this machine that promised prosperity and progress, is revealed to be a house of cards built on speculation and greed. The Depression taught the ruling class something terrifying. If you push people too far, if you let inequality spiral out of control, if you let the economy collapse into chaos, they will revolt. Not metaphorically. Actually, revolt. There were labor strikes, armed confrontations, genuine fear among the wealthy that America might go the way of Russia or Germany. So when Franklin Delano Roosevelt took office in 1933, he didn't save capitalism out of kindness, he saved it out of necessity. The New Deal wasn't charity, it was a firewall. Social Security, unemployment insurance, labor protections, minimum wage laws. These weren't gifts, they were concessions. They were the price the owning class paid to keep the system from burning to the ground. Then came World War II, and war, as always, was very good for business. Factories roared back to life. Unemployment vanished. The government spent money like it was printing it, which it was, but it was spending it on tanks and planes and ships. And when the war ended in 1945, there was a new problem. Millions of men were coming home. They needed jobs. They needed houses. They needed a reason not to start asking dangerous questions about why they'd been sent to die in foreign countries while the rich got richer. So the government, still operating under the shadow of the Depression, still terrified of another collapse, built the post-war economic boom, the GI Bill, federal housing subsidies, infrastructure projects, strong unions with real bargaining power, high marginal tax rates on the wealthy, sometimes exceeding 90% on top earners. This wasn't socialism. This was controlled capitalism. This was the ruling class deciding that it was safer to let the working class have a slice of the pie than to risk losing the whole bakery. And it worked. For a while, the average factory worker in 1950 was making about $3,000 a year. That doesn't sound like much, but let's translate it. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $35,000 in today's money. Not a fortune. But here's the key. A modest house in a decent neighborhood cost around $7,000. Maybe $10,000 if you wanted something nice. That same house today, depending on where you live, it's $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 or more. The ratio is what matters. In 1950, the average home cost about 2 to 3 times the average annual salary. Today, it's 8 to 10 times, sometimes more. You see the problem? The math doesn't just fail to add up. It's been systematically demolished. Let's talk about what that factory worker's life actually looked like. He wakes up at 6 in the morning, eats breakfast with his family, drives to the plant, maybe 10 or 15 minutes away, because urban sprawl hasn't devoured everything yet. He works 8 hours. Maybe it's hard work, maybe it's monotonous, but it's stable. The union negotiated his wages, his benefits, his safety conditions. He's got health insurance through his employer, a pension waiting for him at 65. He clocks out, drives home, and he's done. His wife, and let's be honest about the gender dynamics here, because they matter, his wife is home. Not because women couldn't work, but because they didn't have to. One income covered the mortgage, the car, the groceries, the occasional vacation, the kids' clothes, the doctor visits, everything. Now, let's talk about you. You wake up at 6 in the morning. You and your partner both do. You scramble to get ready, maybe grab coffee, maybe skip breakfast because there's no time. You commute 30, 40, 60 minutes because you can't afford to live near where you work. You work 8 hours, but let's be real. It's more like 9 or 10 because nobody actually works 40 hours anymore. You're answering emails at night, on weekends, during vacations that you're too afraid to take because layoffs are always looming. Your partner is doing the same thing. You both have college degrees. You both have debt from those degrees. You're both making more money in raw dollars than that factory worker in 1950. But after you pay rent, after you pay student loans, after you pay for childcare if you're brave enough to have kids, after you pay for health insurance that doesn't actually cover anything until you hit a deductible that's higher than most people's savings, after all of that, you have less security, less stability, less hope, and definitely less time. So what happened? How did we go from one income supporting a family to 2 incomes barely keeping people afloat? The answer isn't simple, but it follows a pattern, a very deliberate pattern. Starting in the 1970s, the deal that built the post-war economy started to fall apart. And it didn't fall apart by accident. It was torn apart by people who thought they could make more money without it. Inflation hit hard in the 70s. Oil crises, stagflation, economic chaos. And the response from the ruling class wasn't to double down on the policies that had created stability. It was to abandon them. They called it neoliberalism, but you can just call it greed with a philosophy degree. The idea was simple: deregulate, cut taxes on the wealthy, destroy unions, privatize public goods. Let the market decide. And the market decided exactly what you'd expect. The rich got richer. Everyone else got squeezed. Ronald Reagan took office in 1981. One of his first major acts was breaking the Air Traffic Controllers Union. It sent a message. Unions were no longer protected. Strikes would be crushed. Workers had no leverage. And without unions, wages stagnated. Productivity kept rising. Workers kept producing more value, but the money stopped flowing to them. It flowed up, to shareholders, to executives, to people who already had more than they could ever spend. At the same time, the cost of everything started climbing. Housing, because supply was restricted, and real estate became an investment vehicle for the wealthy. Education, because states cut funding and universities became profit centers. Healthcare, because insurance companies and pharmaceutical giants wrote the laws that were supposed to regulate them. Childcare, because it was never subsidized and became another private market. Every basic necessity of life turned into a profit extraction point. And wages? Wages stayed flat for decades. Here's a number that should make your blood boil. From 1979 to 2019, worker productivity increased by 70%. 70% more value created per worker. And wages, adjusted for inflation, grew by about 12%. Where did the other 58% go? Up, to the top. The wealth didn't disappear. It was stolen, legally, systematically, by design. And here's the cruelest part. They convinced you it was your fault. They told you that if you can't afford a house, it's because you buy too much avocado toast. If you're drowning in student debt, it's because you chose the wrong degree. If you're working 2 jobs and still struggling, it's because you're not hustling hard enough. They took a system that used to work, that used to provide stability and security and a pathway to a decent life, and they broke it. Then they sold you the pieces and called it freedom. The dual income trap is the final insult. It's not that women entering the workforce was bad. It was necessary. It was overdue. It was a step toward equality. But the economy didn't adjust to accommodate it. Instead, it absorbed it. Prices rose to meet the new household income level. What used to cost 1 income now costs 2. And if you're a single-income household today, by choice or by circumstance, you're functionally priced out of the middle class. The system didn't give women opportunity. It conscripted them into economic survival. Think about what that means. In 1950, a family had options. One person could work, one person could stay home, could raise kids, could manage the household, could pursue other interests. It wasn't perfect. Gender roles were rigid and often oppressive, but there was a choice, even if that choice was limited by social norms. Today, there's no choice. Both people work because both people have to. And the time that used to go toward family, toward community, toward rest, toward life, is now sold to employers. Your time isn't yours anymore. It belongs to the system. Let's dig into housing specifically because it's the clearest example of how rigged this has become. In 1950, the federal government was actively helping people buy homes. The Federal Housing Administration insured mortgages. Veterans got low-interest loans. Suburbs were built with federal money. It wasn't altruism. It was social engineering. They wanted to create a class of property-owning workers who had something to lose, who would be invested in the stability of the system. And it worked. Home ownership rates climbed. Wealth was built. Generational wealth. The kind that gets passed down, that gives your kids a head start, that provides security. But that ladder got pulled up. Zoning laws restricted new housing. Investors bought up properties. Homes stopped being places to live and became assets to speculate on. Cities became playgrounds for the global rich, while the people who actually work in those cities get pushed further and further out. And the government that used to help? It stepped back. Subsidies dried up. Interest rates fluctuated wildly. Housing became a market, and markets don't care if you have a roof over your head. They care about returns. Today, the average rent in a major city can easily eat 40, 50, even 60% of your income. And you're told that's normal. You're told to budget better. Meanwhile, your landlord is a private equity firm that owns 10,000 units and is raising rent because they can. Because there's no competition. Because there's no regulation. Because the system is designed to extract every possible dollar from you and call it efficiency. Healthcare is another nightmare. In 1950, a visit to the doctor cost a few dollars. A hospital stay might set you back $100, maybe $200 for something serious. Adjusted for inflation, that's significant, but it's manageable. Today, people are going bankrupt from medical debt. They're rationing insulin. They're avoiding doctors because they can't afford the bill. And it's not because healthcare got more expensive to provide, it's because it got more profitable to withhold. Insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, hospital conglomerates, they all saw a chance to turn human suffering into shareholder value. And they took it. Education? Same story. State universities used to be cheap, sometimes almost free. The idea was that an educated population was a public good. It benefited everyone, so everyone chipped in through taxes. Then the ideology shifted. Education became a private investment. You want a degree? Pay for it yourself. Take out loans. Lots of loans. And those loans can't be discharged in bankruptcy. They follow you forever. You graduate with $30,000, $40,000, $60,000 in debt before you even start your life. And the jobs that require those degrees? They pay less, adjusted for inflation, than they did 30 years ago. You're paying more for less. And the interest on those loans? That's profit. For banks, for loan servicers, for a system that turned education into a debt trap. Childcare costs more than college in some places. Think about that. The thing you need so you can go to work costs more than a university education. And there's no federal subsidies, no universal programs, nothing. You're on your own. So parents, usually mothers, have to make impossible choices. Work and spend half your income on daycare, or stay home and lose that income entirely. Either way, you lose. Every single pillar of the 1950s middle-class life, home ownership, healthcare, education, raising a family, has been financialized and turned into a profit center. And the money you used to keep, the money that used to build wealth and security, is now extracted at every stage. You're not failing. The system is working exactly as designed, just not for you. So where does that leave us? If the 1950s model is dead, if the game is rigged, if two incomes can't do what one used to, what's the answer? You're not going to like it. Because the answer isn't a policy tweak or a new app or a side hustle. The answer is recognizing that you're living in a system that is fundamentally hostile to your well-being. And once you see that, once you really see it, you have two choices. You can keep playing by their rules and hope things get better, or you can start building something different. That doesn't mean dropping out entirely. Most people can't do that. But it means rethinking what success looks like. It means questioning every assumption you've been sold. Do you really need a bigger house, or is that just what the real estate market wants you to believe? Do you really need a new car every few years, or is that just planned obsolescence and advertising? Do you really need to work 60 hours a week, or is that just your employer exploiting your fear of being replaced? The system survives because you keep feeding it your labor, your money, your time, your anxiety. And it will take everything you give it and ask for more. The radical act isn't making more money, it's wanting less. It's rejecting the treadmill. It's finding ways to live that don't require you to sell every waking hour to survive. It's building community with people who understand that the game is rigged and who are trying to find another way. It's cutting expenses, not to be cheap, but to be free. It's recognizing that time is the only resource you can't get back, and spending it on things that actually matter instead of things the algorithm tells you to want. And politically, it means demanding better, not asking, demanding. The policies that built the 1950s economy didn't appear out of nowhere. They were fought for. By unions, by activists, by people who were willing to strike and march and disrupt until the powerful had no choice but to concede. Those policies were dismantled by the rich because we stopped fighting. We got comfortable, or we got tired, or we got convinced that there was no alternative. But there is. There always has been. It just requires recognizing that the people at the top will never give you anything unless you make it more expensive for them not to. Universal health care, free public education, housing as a human right, not an investment vehicle, strong unions with real power, a minimum wage that's actually livable, taxes on wealth, not just income. These aren't radical ideas. They're the baseline of a functional society. And the fact that they sound radical to you is a measure of how far we've fallen. The single income myth isn't about going back to the 1950s. You can't go back, and honestly, you wouldn't want to. The social restrictions, the racism, the rigid gender roles, those things were real and they were brutal for anyone outside the narrow definition of normal. But the economic structure, the idea that one job should be enough to live a decent life, that's not nostalgia. That's just basic dignity. And it's possible. The wealth exists. The resources exist. The technology exists. What's missing is the will to distribute it fairly. What's missing is a population angry enough to demand it. So, the next time someone tells you to work harder, to budget better, to stop complaining, remember this. Your grandparents could buy a house on a single factory income. You can't. Not because you're worse than them, not because you're lazy or entitled or weak, but because the people who own everything decided they wanted more, and they took it from you. They took your time. They took your security. They took your future. And they told you to be grateful for the scraps. You don't have to be grateful. You don't have to accept it. And you definitely don't have to believe the lie that this is just how things are. This is how things were made to be. And anything that was made can be unmade. The question is whether you're ready to stop playing their game and start building your own. The 1950s weren't perfect, but they proved something important. That capitalism, when forced, can provide a decent life for ordinary people. It did it once, it can do it again. But it won't happen because the market decides it's time. It will happen because people decide they've had enough. And when enough people decide that, when enough people stop accepting the crumbs and start demanding the whole loaf, the system will bend, or it will break. Either way, change is coming. The only question is whether you'll be part of making it happen, or whether you'll keep running on the treadmill until it grinds you down to nothing. That's the real cost of the 1950s dream. Not that it's gone, but that it was taken from you, and you were told it was your fault for losing it.